Hello all. Following a comment on a previous video, I thought I'd do a brief overview on the Disney Plus show Hawkeye. I may be doing a slight deep delve as well on my feelings on the show. I get the feeling I'm in the minority here because I enjoyed this show. It's probably the best overall of the Disney Plus shows. I think the first 5 episodes of WandaVision are great, but it dropped off a cliff whilst Hawkeye maintained its appeal for me, possibly right till the very end where it has a little problem. But as most of these shows, it's definitely not without its problems, which I'll go into. One of the criticisms levelled is that it's another bait and switch, and I understand that given what came before and those MCU issues, and within the context of Marvel Comics generally and unsuccessfully attempting to diversify their roster by replacing the popular male characters, as the female Hawkeye is. However, to me, a bait and switch is presenting one thing that is actually another. But this was always presented as a passing of the torch, master and student dynamic, so I don't think that classification really applies. The basic and very simplified story is that Kate Bishop, inspired by seeing Hawkeye in action during the Battle of New York, has been training for years and stumbles upon an illegal auction selling superhero and Avengers gear, puts on Clint's Ronin costume when she's about to be discovered. Clint is in the city with his kids and has to come out of retirement in pursuit of this impersonator, and then together they fight against a criminal organisation to protect themselves and those they love. I find it quite interesting that during a battle of gods and monsters, Kate is inspired by Clint. He's an incredibly skilled man, but just a human. Haley Steinfeld injects a lot of warmth and charm into Kate, who is a pretty unlikable character in the comics, and whilst they initially give the impression that she's a Mary Sue after a training montage during the titles, it becomes clear during the show that she's far from that. She's skilled and enthusiastic and inspired to be a hero, despite her family's wealth, but is also shown to be woefully naive, inexperienced and actually inept at times. Clint, on the other hand, is done with the superhero business and seemingly just wants to be with his family. He's clearly broken by it, physically and emotionally, and the death of Natasha weighs heavily on him. In fact, the much criticised and admittedly cringeworthy Rogers the Musical is actually used quite nicely to illustrate that. There's also a guilt and regret he bears for his actions after the snap, which he is struggling to reconcile, and Jeremy Renner does a great job of communicating that. So what you have is the juxtaposition of the jaded old warrior and the naive, enthusiastic protege. It's quite a traditional narrative, and reminded me a little of True Grit, which is ironic given Haley was in the remake. There are themes of loss and grief, and a meditation on the cost of being a superhero amongst said gods and monsters when you're only human. And Clint tries repeatedly to impress this upon Kate, that there's a high price to her choice, and sometimes that price is too high. And I actually love this part of the show because it contextualises both characters and the choices they make, and it kind of frames Clint as more heroic because of his previous actions. And it's something that was referenced slightly in Age of Ultron. It could in turn do the same to Kate, but unfortunately they fluff that at the end. Well, for me anyway. In fact, grief and at times revenge play a large part in this show. Kate's decisions are in part motivated by her father's death during the Battle of New York. Clint is grieving Nat, and in part his own actions. And there's a lovely moment where he is standing before the monument of New York and he's asking Nat's forgiveness for what he is about to do. And you get a hint that part of the reason for his retiring is to avoid going to that dark place again. The main protagonist, Echo, is grieving her father's death at the hands of Ronin, and revenge is part of her story, especially when Kate, wearing the Ronin costume, suddenly appears. And Natasha's erstwhile sister Yelena is seeking revenge on Clint because she blames him for Nat's death. Yelena is really nicely played by Florence Pugh. I really rate her as an actress, and there's a great chemistry between her and Haley. This is fantastically evidenced in a scene where they share a meal. Pugh's apparent jovialness in the scene is wonderfully undercut by an ever-present threat. So despite her good humour, you never forget that she could kill Kate with barely any effort, but is choosing not to. However, Yelena's revenge storyline is badly compromised by the revelation that she's being paid to kill Clint. For me, that decreases her agency, blurs her motivation, and contradicts some of what she says. It also impacts the resolution. Since that is technically a negative, I will start going into some of the others. But for the most part, because I enjoyed the show, I didn't find them as jarring as I might. The Tracksuit Mafia are quite amusing, though pretty one-dimensional, which is fine because they're just goons, really just there to be beaten up. But unfortunately their leaders are also uninspired. Kazi, the male antagonist, is also just a goon really, who's in a relationship with Echo. And she's just not an interesting character. And I don't want to be mean, but the actress just isn't very good or charismatic. So I dread to think what the Echo series will be like. I'm hearing some rumours that it's going to be a car crash. I found the LARPing stuff to be quite cringeworthy, but I guess that was to counterbalance some of the heavier themes. There's also the obligatory validation scene, and it feels really out of place and not fitting with the characters involved. A conversation could have been had at this point, but not this one. And finally, there's the moment that almost broke the show for me, but it won't be for the same reason that many other people might think, and that's the fight between Kingpin and Kate. As I said in my previous video, it's not a great introduction to such a major villain that is earlier portrayed in the show as the bogeyman who even Clint doesn't want to get involved with. And Kate beating him does undermine him. To give you an idea of what I mean, imagine in the first Avengers film, Hawkeye had beaten Thanos. After that, could you ever see Thanos as being the major threat that he was supposed to be? And this is what I mean by this moment. Within the show, I'm fine, but in a broader context, it's quite damaging. Him being beaten through trickery and luck, and actually a callback to an earlier moment in the show, is entirely reasonable to me. The underdog beating the much more powerful antagonist is a pretty common trope in comics and movies, and I'm not going to judge it differently because it's in the MCU. The context obviously matters when people view this, but if I'm not going to criticise it when a dude does it, then it would be hypocritical of me to criticise this particular scene when it's a woman. It's made totally clear that she is absolutely outmatched physically as he throws her around like a rag doll, and she can't do anything to stop him. But again, that's part of my issue, which I am getting to, promise you. As I've waxed lyrical, one of the major themes of the show is the physical and emotional cost of being a hero, which Clint is constantly impressing upon Kate. And Kingpin is a man who just ripped a car door off and got up from being hit by that same car. And he hits Kate so hard that she flies across the room, but she gets up and walks away with barely a scratch. To me, it feels really in conflict with that theme. I feel it would have been so much better if she'd been injured, but was still committed to being a hero, despite knowing what the cost could be. I suppose there is a cost of sorts when her mum is arrested, but it doesn't have the same thematic impact that her being injured would have had. Well, I don't think so anyway. To address another particular bit of MCU-based criticism, Clint the super agent being beaten by women. It has some validity again, as there is a little men are dumb girl boss stuff, but pretty much each time it happens because Clint lets it. He stops fighting. Both key fights with Echo and Yelena, Clint could have won. It's pretty clear, but his actions are a reflection of his emotional journey. He doesn't want to have to do what he thinks he's going to have to do to Echo or Yelena. Now, Clint is a bit sidelined in the last episode, and the tree bit does annoy me. And as others have noted, in the fight with them together, Kate is definitely at the forefront. Again, in the context of the MCU, I understand that criticism. And it is a little jarring, but within the context of the show, it's a coming-of-age moment. It represents her emerging from the shadow of her teacher and starting to become who she is supposed to be. It's a reflection of her journey. And I say starting because despite that, it's clear that she still has a long way to go. I'll wrap up with the final positive part that I loved. A quick bit of background. During the auction, which included items from the destroyed Avengers compound, there's a watch. It seems innocuous, but the antagonists are after it, as well as Ronin, and you later found out it would reveal the identity of a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. Now the show takes place just before Christmas, and Clint sends his family home and promises he'll be back before Christmas Day. But he keeps repeatedly letting them down. First to stop whoever's in the Ronin costume, seemingly to protect his reputation, and then to protect Kate, with the watch almost as a side story. At the end, Clint and Kate go to Clint's home to celebrate a belated Christmas with his family. And here we discover that the agent who would have been exposed by the watch was actually his wife. So whilst on the surface it seemed like he was putting himself and others first, his actual main motivation was to protect his wife and family, and I really liked that. It was a nice little flip. Right, well, I'll leave that there. And I'll just add, I wish Jeremy Renner a speedy recovery. That's my feelings on the show. You could argue that it's headcanon, or that I'm ignoring the major problems, or just talking bollocks, and I'd be really interested to hear your opinions on that. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it, and peace out.